Hi everybody, welcome to your second flip video for World History 1 this year. Please go ahead and title your Cornell notes, Who Were the Maya? And you can also label them flip video 1.2, if you can add that in there. And let's go ahead and begin. Now many of you may be familiar with the Maya, or as they're commonly stated, the Mayan civilization. We're speaking about the same place. The Maya were one of the original Mesoamerican civilizations. Mesoamerica is a term that literally means Middle America. More commonly, we would refer to this as Central America. This was home to some of the earliest human settlements, and the Maya were not the first, but they were one of the largest lasting and one of the most complex of the early American civilizations. To start, though, we got to back up just a bit because we got to go to, and here it is, just if we're looking at the world map, there in that circled area is an example or is a reference to Mesoamerica or Middle America. Now, technically speaking, we know that that's all part of North America. Common misconception, people think that North America is just Canada, United States, and Mexico. But in fact, North America includes all of the countries of Central America as well, and which is also including many of the islands there. So that's the area that we're going to begin our study of the world. But let's back ourselves up. We're going to go all the way back to how it is this civilization, these early American civilizations began. And they began as a result of migration. You'll notice I actually put a question here. How did Mesoamerican civilizations begin? And you could put that on the left-hand side of your notes. They began as a result of the migrations out of Africa from the earliest humans following their sources of food. It is believed that all human life, every single person, is theorized, began in Africa. That's where was home to the earliest human life, earliest evidence of human life. It is then believed that the earliest humans, as I just mentioned, were following their sources of food, meaning their animals. As they migrated over space, the humans followed them. And you can see some of those earliest migrations that are theorized on this map here. Now, we are talking earliest meaning 60,000 years ago, right? So human beings have been on the Earth for a long time, not nearly as long as the Earth has existed. In fact, human life itself is just but a blip on the timeline of the entire world. However, we need to understand exactly where these migrations came from. Now, you'll notice that original circle on the left I have there is the circle of where human life is believed to have begun in the east, in the Rift Valley of Africa. And then you see where I've circled following the migrations of people. Now, and one thing that many of you may have noticed in modern times, that is an impossible walk to make because right here is an area is a body of water known as the Bering Straits. Back when these earliest humans made these migrations, that area was actually frozen over, and that ice bridge was known as Beringia. So that ice has since melted, but early humans were able to make that migration there. You can see I just circled this here, that the migration to the Americas, again, North-South America being referenced to the Americas, somewhere on the order of 7,000 to 35,000 years ago. So that's a huge span of time that could be theorized that this happened. Some humans, as you see, remained in North America, so that's yet another reason why that concept of Christopher Columbus discovering America is nonsense. There were people who've been here for thousands and thousands of years. Other of these early humans continued their migrations down, likely looking for warmer weather, better for agriculture, and settled here in Central America and South America, and that's where we're going to begin our study of these civilizations. What caused these people to actually stay is this very important revolution known as the Neolithic or Agricultural Revolution. You see that in red, we'll put that on the left-hand side. That revolution is in reference to the beginning of farming and the domestication of animals. Humans, is believed accidentally to be a woman, accidentally figured out, likely a woman, figured out that that the seeds are replanted or part of a plant is replanted for some plants, that you in fact generate growth, and then you can actually farm in a single place. It's believed that was a woman because women typically had the job of gathering berries, so it's theorized that a woman was probably the most common candidate for a person to figure out, or groups of women to figure out, that staying in a place and replanting these crops would yield actual food. What this means, and I'm sorry, let me finish this here. The beginnings, I must have cut this off. Nope, there it is. Okay, beginnings of human settlement. Once people figured out that they could farm, and that domestication animals is a reference to using animals for your own benefit and training those animals. Then people realized that they could actually stay in one place, and we have the beginnings of human settlement. And you see some of these are the earliest ones that we will not talk about. We have the Olmecs, the Zapotec, the Chave, the Moche people. Many groups of people were settled very early on in Mesoamerica. Now I want to show you this timeline. Let's again review timelines here real quickly. We've got the year 0 here. BCE standing for before Common Era. Also, people refer to this as BC, before Christ, but not everyone's Christian, so we're going to use before Common Era to represent these time periods. We have people, including the Maya, going all the way back to 1200 BCE. That would mean 1200 years before the year 0. Here's 2015, way over here. So 2,000 years after 0, we're talking about 1200 years before 0. You see we've got many early groups like the Olmecs, the Zapotecs, the Moche. I already mentioned all these many groups. We're going to be focusing, this particular course is entitled World History 1, Middle Ages and Geography, which means that we're actually going to be focusing, here's year 0, on some of the later civilizations here in the period of world history known as the Middle Ages. We're going to be focusing on the Inca, the Aztecs, and the Maya. Right? Again, same Maya that I said here. So the Maya existing for a very long period of time. We're focusing primarily on those groups because we're going to be looking at the interactions between these groups and their ultimate conquerors of the Europeans. So let's, just to set the stage here, that's just so we're familiar with the idea that these are not the only groups of people. This Neolithic revolution, agricultural revolution, led to early settlements. And one of those early settlements was this group of people known as the Maya. Okay, please put Maya on the left-hand side of your notes. So the Maya were a thriving, advanced empire of interconnected city-states in the Yucatan Peninsula. So frame yourself geographically. You see the United States, you see Florida, that's the Gulf of Mexico, actually the country here of Mexico, of course, and an area of Mexico known as the Yucatan Peninsula. If you didn't know what a peninsula is, please put that term on the left-hand side. That's an area of land surrounded by water on 3 sides. The Yucatan Peninsula is the area in which the Maya Empire thrived. The Maya actually continue to exist. You see as well that in modern day, part of the Yucatan Peninsula is actually part of Belize and the country of Guatemala. Now the time frame here is hazy because it's not a defined beginning or defined known end. But generally speaking, we're talking from maybe as far back as 2000 BCE, 2,000 years before the year 0, which would be 4,000 years ago, all the way through about 900 CE. Many Maya settlements continued all the way through up until about 1400. But so our time frame here is a little bit shaky, simply because we don't have no specific evidence to demonstrate the exact beginning or precise end. And they ended when they were ultimately conquered by European conquistadors. Conquistadors is a term meaning conquerors, something that you might have heard of before, of these men coming out to explore and encountering these people that they believe to be savages and barbarians. We're going to seek to prove that while there are perhaps practices that are unfamiliar or different than the practices of our lives, that these were in fact very thriving and complex civilizations. Okay, we're going to structure our notes using the SPICE categories: social, cultural, political, interaction between humans and the environment, culture, and economic, the different lenses through which historians often analyze civilizations. So I'm going to structure each slide with this information, which means that on the left-hand side, let's go ahead and put either social systems or what were the social systems of the Maya, and then we'll continue our typical practice of left-hand side for terms, right-hand side for definitions. So in other words, we're going to have our notes separated into each one of these SPICE categories. So starting us off, most of these early civilizations, and really modern civilizations as well, have some sort of social class system where people are organized in what's known as a hierarchy. A hierarchy is any sort of ranking system. The Maya had a very rigid social class system. There are 3 classes. The noble class, we can put that on the left, was comprised of the king, priests, and warriors. So we can see right from the get-go that we have a strong influence of religion in this society if priests are at the very top of the social class system, right alongside the king. And we'll come back to the king momentarily. Our middle class is where we have merchants and master craftsmen, meaning business people or people with specific trades or specific skills. And lastly, as is the case with many civilizations, the majority of the people fell into the lower class, known as simply as the peasants, but we have a very broad range of the type of life that people live as peasants. For the vast majority of the people living in the lower class and the vast majority of the people of the society, we're speaking about people who are farmers, and they are farming so that they and their family can eat and can live. So that's the beginnings. We have this rigid social class system. You can see here that just sort of this depiction of Maya life from as a reproduction or as a representation of a hieroglyph here. The idea that the Maya would have the king would be shown much reverence and respect. Similarly, we could put this on the left-hand side. You could put gender roles, right? On the right-hand side, we could say that they were clearly defined. Most early civilizations have very specific differences in the jobs and the tasks for men and women. It is only but in very recent history that women on a global scale, and this isn't even necessarily true on a global scale in a modern day, that women are getting a general sense that there's far more equality across the sexes. For most of human history, there's been a significant and deliberate difference between the role of women and the role of men. In Maya society, men were primarily responsible for hunting. They were often the farmers themselves. They would build the shelter. They were largely involved with the manual labor sorts of tasks. On the right-hand side, you see that we've got women. So speaking about structure of notes, I would put men on the left, and then the examples on the right, women on the left, examples on the right. Women were largely in charge of the domestic tasks. One thing in particular that women were skilled for, both in the Maya and the Aztec civilization, were weaving, so the creation of clothes and in cloth. And they also were in charge of child rearing, so bringing up the children. In Maya society, I spoke already about that rigid class system. All of the lower classes were responsible for paying tribute. Tribute is essentially taxes. They're either goods or services that are essentially a tax that's paid to let's expand that, there we go, king. Okay. So this system of tribute was a very important part of unifying the society economically, unifying the society politically, so they know who's in charge and know that king's in charge, and to ensure that the lower classes were loyal, essentially, to the king. Speaking of political, okay, let's move to political. Political, again, is how the society governs itself, who has power and who does not, which is often very closely linked to the social class system. Political, we put that on the left. One of the key facts is that the Maya, even though we talk about the Maya society and Maya civilization, the Maya were not a single unified empire. It's not like there was a single king who ruled over a large group, an area. Rather, Maya is often actually a reference to sort of the heritage of a people, in that the Maya were all these independent city-states. For a city-state, that often comes up in history, you likely study that if you studied Rome or Greece in the past. The idea that a single city essentially acts like a state, like you and I associate a state with Virginia or Maryland. In this instance, you'd have a single city with an individual king who would rule over that city and its surrounding territory. So the Maya were not a single unified empire, but rather a system of interconnected city-states who depended on one another for trade. But each one of those kingdoms, and each one of those city-states was ruled by a separate king. That's important. Another key term on the left-hand side of your notes, each one of these city-states was run in what's known as a theocracy. Okay, a theocracy in general is a type of government whereby the leaders of the government are also leaders in the religious faith, or the government is simply based upon a religious faith. You and I live in a place where there's, in theory, a separation of church and state. However, in many areas of the world, leaders rule based specifically upon the beliefs of a faith. That is the case here with the Maya, but it's almost even more so religiously based in that the king was actually believed to be a god himself, or in some individual city-states that the king has a special connection to the gods, so somehow was more spiritually inclined or spiritually powerful than other people. This is significant because this meant that the authority of the king was not just political. It wasn't just about government and ruling over people, but he himself also had religious power and religious significance. I just want to get you acquainted with some of the areas that I'm speaking about here. These independent city-states is this idea that all of these different areas would be independent kingdoms, essentially. So a king would rule over, for example, Chichen Itza is not labeled on here. Actually, it's right there. So Chichen Itza, this king would be ruling specifically within that city, and the surrounding territory would be under his control as well. Something you'll notice, there's the post-classical, classic, and pre-classic eras of the Maya. We're going to talk about how the later Maya differed in some of their practices than the early Maya civilizations, because just like any other place, they were influenced by who they were interacting with. Now, it's no surprise that, and we can put on the left-hand sides of our notes, maybe something on the effect of interactions between kings. There was frequent warfare between the kings of all these city-states. It's no surprise that many leaders who are all vying, which means competing for power, there was often warfare between Maya city-states, which is important because that's one of the believed reasons why the Maya Empire ultimately fell, which is because it had been weakened by some of this internal infighting between some of the kings and that's even before any of the European conquistadors arrived. Moving forward, between interactions between humans and the environment. This is an important part of ancient civilization, or early civilizations, I should say, and it's extremely important even in modern day, that have technologically advanced, but we are still subject much to the environment around us. One of the things that was very important, this Yucatan Peninsula here is very, very dense, has very thick vegetation, essentially is a jungle in many areas of this very, very dense vegetation. Therefore, in order to farm, the Maya and the Aztecs, and later on to some extent the Inca, had a farming practice known as slash and burn farming. Please put that on the left-hand side. Slash and burn farming is a practice whereby vegetation, that means the plants that are growing in a particular place, are cleared from the area. That means the slash, so you're actually slashing it down, and you're doing so in order to create flat land to farm on. All of the remnants, so everything you've just chopped down, is then burned, right? So now you have a completely clear field. And then you can actually farm on that land. So you've slashed and burned that area so that you now have an area to farm on. What that means is that you will then have... Okay, we keep going. So what you have with the slash and burn farming is that you have cleared farmland, so you can have a flat surface to farm on. However, the fertility of the soil, meaning the nutrients, by burning that, you're going to fertilize the soil. So you got that plants and the vegetation is now fertilized in the soil, but that will only last for a short period of time. It can vary. It can be 6 years, but it can be 20 years. But after that period is up, the land becomes infertile. Infertile means that you cannot farm on it. Fertile means that you can be farmed. Infertile means it cannot be farmed. So that forces them for people to then physically move to a new area to farm new land. Now, I'm not necessarily saying you need to go miles and miles and miles. It depends on how far you've burned your farmland. But that's an important important type of early adaptations to the environment. And this very thick, dense vegetation in the areas near the equator, as the Yucatan Peninsula is, slash and burn farming was one of the common agricultural practices, and in fact remains such for some areas of the world today. Some of the early crops that were grown there, we're talking about beans, squash, maize, of course being corn there. So these are different, some of the the staple crops. You can see here, this is a burned, an area that's been cleared for my AP Human Geographers out there. This land is now fallow. This is the Swidden area. So this is the area that's now ready to be farmed. Culturally, now this is significant. Okay. The Maya are known, one of the reasons why we focus on the Maya of all these civilizations is because of their intellectual achievements as an early group of people. One of the things that the Maya did culturally, and now it's important to also differentiate that culture isn't just the traditions and expressions and customs of the people. As I just said, when we speak about culture, we're also speaking about their intellectual or academic, technological achievements. All of that fall within the cultural section of study. On the left-hand side, you can put achievements to start us off. One of the things that Maya did is they created 2 calendars, and one of them is a 365-day calendar, which should sound very familiar to you given that we have a 365-day calendar. That seems like it's insignificant, but it's pretty significant when you consider that the Maya calculated the exact orbit of the Earth around the Sun, which is where we get our 365-day calendar from, exclusively from observations. with the naked eye. We're not talking any kind of modern technology involved. So that's pretty impressive. And that's the calendar that they would use for farming. They also had a 260-day religious calendar. So those two calendars were important components of unifying the civilization as well, and are often viewed as examples of the intellectual achievements of this civilization. The Maya had what's known as a long count system, or long count numerical system. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say writing system. Long count numerical system. That's what they, and within this long count, so this long count you can see is actually, it's different than is a base 20, for example. We have a base 10 in our number system. Theirs was a base 20. And one of the significant components is it included this concept of zero, something that you and I would think of probably in one ear, out the other. Sure, zero, not too significant. But in fact, it took many Arab scholars also came up with this concept of zero. But this is a very, very early indication of the mathematical abilities and inclinations. The idea that you can have a number zero is one other key example of this intellectual achievement. The Maya were also very skilled artisans and sculptors, right? Another example of sort of that cultural expression and cultural achievement. Also, you could simply say that they're good architects. What they created, one of the things that's a really common symbol of Maya civilization, are known as step pyramids, which you see right here. These step pyramids were created as places of worship. This is not to be confused with the pyramids of Egypt, which were used as tombs. Rather, these were temples. These were places of significant religious importance in Maya society. Not only were they used for religion, but these temples also allowed for an advanced study of astronomy, which is the study of the skies and of space, right? So through their architecture, they would actually enable themselves to achieve even other intellectual, or to achieve other intellectual pursuits, and which is one of which we just discussed, which is coming up with the calendar. I just want to show you some pictures of this. I took a trip down to the Maya ruins. This is some of them. They're still standing many years later. This one here is in Tulum, which is in the Yucatan Peninsula, just south of Cancun. You can see the same architectural style that exists here. You can see the fact that these still remain, and largely, this one has been reconditioned. This one has not, on the right there. You can see just sort of the impressive architectural skill of these early people. Again, I need you to consider this may not look so impressive, but you need to remind yourself that these are being done without modern technology and modern tools. You can see this one, it's a little bit tricky to see, but I wanted to show you some of the artistic skill. You can see sort of the eye right here that's carved in, very well rounded. There's actually a lot of color associated with this. Most of the early buildings were actually decorated with red, or some you'll see later, some of them are actually, they still have some of the turquoise that the Maya used to decorate. Again, you can see here, this is a depiction of a god in their buildings and their architecture. This one here is just another one of the temples that's in Coba, Mexico. This right here, where the thatched roof is protecting, is what's known as a codex. And the codex are where the Maya recorded their writing. They used stone and they used bark to actually record their hieroglyphs, which was their form of writing, which we'll get to in just a second. This is pretty cool. You can see the Maya too, just their architecture. They would rebuild. If you look from here, here's a stone, here's a step. You can see within this, there's actually a whole other step here. And the Maya would rebuild these temples. They'd build a temple on top of a temple every 54 years, which is a representation of one cycle or one layer of their calendar, essentially, which is called a Baktun. It's every 54 years. It was called one Baktun. Really common misconception that the Maya predicted the end of the world. Completely inaccurate. That's a misreading of the Maya calendar, which is an idea that the time actually cycles through, and the beginning of one Baktun simply marked the beginning of the next, or one end of Baktun marked the beginning of the next. So very common misconception about the Maya and predicting the end of the world and all that jazz. Okay, so here's what I just mentioned. The Maya had a writing system, and that writing system was called glyphs. Glyphs, we can put that on the left-hand side. Or you can also call it hieroglyphs. All this is a representation. The word glyphs is just when symbols are used to represent words. That's what that means. And so here we're talking about symbols. There'd be one particular symbol that would actually be representative of a whole word, as opposed to what you and I speak in, which is a phonetic language, where each letter has a sound associated with it, and those letters come together. Different sounds come together to create meaning, as opposed to a symbol creating meaning. That information was recorded on codex. The plural of that is codices, which is stone or bark. Unfortunately, we have very, very few of these left because the conquering conquistadors, that's kind of a little bit redundant, the conquistadors viewed the Maya civilization as so barbaric and savage that they actually destroyed much of the evidence that is of the Maya writing. So that's sadly there's very limited ones, but this is one on the right that I did take a picture, just an example of the glyphs. This actually is one of the true glyphs. This here is just an example of sort of the Maya architecture and writing, but that is an example of what they would write on. This writing was considered to be one of the most fully developed of any Mesoamerican civilization, but it's still not entirely understood because, as I just mentioned, we're working off a very limited set of information for people to actually decode this writing system. We're still on culture. I know there's a lot here. Religiously, this was a highly, highly religious society. Religion was sort of the fabric that wove the entire society together. A key term for all of our civilizations that we will study and just in life is this was a polytheistic society. Polytheistic means the belief in many gods. Monotheistic, of course, would be the belief in one god. One of the things that the Maya practiced, though it is believed, perhaps this wasn't necessarily their original idea, is they did practice human sacrifice. Human sacrifice and ritual bloodletting. Bloodletting would be cutting oneself and offering some of that blood to the gods. And it was believed to appease the gods. To appease means to please the gods. But it is important. I mentioned before that there are different periods of Maya history, and there's evidence that that practice may have actually come from Aztecs or Toltec people, because the earliest Maya settlements don't have evidence of that sacrificial practice. But the later Maya settlements, the ones that were likely that did exist at the same time as the Toltecs and the Aztecs, do have evidence of human sacrifice. So there's a theory that perhaps that wasn't actually a Maya practice, but one that came from the Aztecs and the Toltecs. The gods were highly connected to nature. That doesn't make sense. Highly gods connected to nature. Gods highly connected to nature, which makes perfect sense because this is an agricultural or farming society, which means that if you need rain, you want to pray to your rain god. If you need sun, you're going to pray to the sun god. So there's a significant connection here between religion and even economic practices. The Maya did not invent this, but they did play the first organized team sport, which is known as the Mesoamerican ball game. And this is an example of a ball court right here. And I'm going to show you what this actually looks like. Well, actually, hold on one second. Well, we'll talk about it first. So the Mesoamerican ball game was played in a ball court, as you see here. It actually had significant religious influence. This practice was not necessarily a public one. There wasn't one that was played in front of all people for everyone to come watch or witness. It wasn't like a gladiator games. Rather, it was a private ceremony that was in a religious ceremony that was believed, the practice of which was believed to keep the sun and the moon in cycle every day. Now, a component of that it was, as I just mentioned, there's evidence that in these later civilizations that the losers of this game were actually sacrificed, right? So this is, imagine your most high stakes championship and multiply that stakes by about 1,000,000, and that's the high stakes of this game. This is a picture I took of the ball court at Koba, which is one of the most well-preserved ones. You can see here there's that ring, and the object of the game, okay, was to bounce a rubber ball, but it could be up to 8 pounds, right? 8 pounds, that's enormous, of a rubber ball through that hoop, right? And you get that through that hoop without using your hands. So we've got sort of a connection here between basketball and soccer. We see the evolution of the team sports. So we're talking your hips, your knees, your shoulders, your shoulders, not your elbows, to get that ball through the hoop. But 8 pounds, I mean, that's pretty incredible. You can see, again, I just showed you an example of some of the written hieroglyphs there when I'm going to come back to these pictures. So let's take a look at what that ball game actually looks like. This, of course, is a reenactment, but this helps us see what the ball game was actually all about. And there's them trying to keep this in practice and in play. And there's the other team coming in. But imagine that rubber ball is huge. It's just huge. It takes a lot of skill. These games could go on for days and days and days to get that ball through the hoop. All right, you get the idea. Okay, just want to show you too some other examples of the architecture. There's my husband and I. We climbed up to the top of this temple. I just wanted to give you a sense of the scope here. This is one of the highest ones in all of the Yucatan Peninsula, but what's just absolutely incredible is just considering how much work and how much effort and how much coordination and organization would go into building a structure like this without the use of any modern tools, and given that it's survived now for thousands of years. So pretty incredible. Oh, and there's a picture of a skull that I took. This was actually found beneath to just outside of the ball court. So clear evidence of the relationship between the ball game and sacrifices to the gods. Okay. Lastly, economic. How are they? How does a society maintain itself? How are people provided for? As I already mentioned, these were agricultural societies, which means that these were farming societies. The vast majority of the people were farmers. They were also highly dependent upon trade. So I mentioned already these city-states were all connected to one another through trade, and that's how many of the resources came into the civilization. There wasn't a real currency per se. That's something, particularly paper currency, doesn't that starts in China. But there's no real currency, but people did value cacao beans, which you use then to create chocolate. So cacao beans had significant value and could be used to trade many different goods. Salt was traded, obsidian, which is a special type of rock, jade, which we significant or precious stone. So you can see here that in fact that's a carving in the top right made out of jade. So trade, largely a trading or bartering society, but there are certain objects that had more value than others. Last picture I'll subject you to here. Another important thing economically, I already mentioned this, was that system of tribute or taxation that people paid to their king. Another way that the society taxed people is that you see right here on the right, this is a structure that we built and would be manned by troops at all intersections of roads. So many of the Maya city-states, not all, but many, actually had these road systems. And this right here, you can see it's slightly elevated, just slightly. Now you need to use a little bit of creative imagination because we got trees growing in it now. But hundreds of years ago, this would have been raised about 3 feet off the ground. And the roads are made out of white rock because then the traders could see the road better at night. So as the sun was setting, traders could still walk along the road. At the intersection of all of these roads that connected many of the city-states, they would build these large structures. And as you likely guessed, you could think of this much like a toll road in modern day. So the toll stations you pay to go on a highway, this is the Maya version of the toll road, where the traders would have to come in and pay a certain amount of tribute or give a certain amount of goods to that resident king or resident leader. So another way to economically unify the civilization. Okay, we are done. Here are your analysis questions. Please complete these on a separate sheet of paper. Please label them just as you see here. You could say flipped video 1.2 analysis questions with your name on it. Full and complete sentences for each one of these here. And I will see you in class.